So I've always noticed these things, but admittedly it's more so similarities rather than being an intentional inspiration. So this is pretty much all headcanon. But I think any fan of Berserk would agree with me. Besides that, this video is also in hopes that Varka might share similarities to Guts and more likely Artorias the Abyss Walker, who is quite obvious a nod to Guts, and just to play it safe I'll say that there are similarities between Artorias and some things in Genshin Impact. Because in my head it's an inspiration, but I could be very wrong. I don't want to go too deep into Artorias the Abyss Walker, as the similarities between Genshin and him aren't far from Artorias to Guts. So to sum it up, the Wolf Knight of Boreas has to be a nod to Artorias. The only difference story-wise is, oh, and spoilers for Dark Souls, Artorias sacrificed himself for Sif, as were the Knight of Boreas outlived his companion. You'll notice a lot of similarities are simply the opposite in one way or another, but even then I would still call it a similarity. And my hopes is that Varka, despite not being that exact knight from the lore obviously, might still hold the same traits and values as the older Knights of Boreas. Because if that is the case, I'm expecting a very good nod to Berserk when Varka is included. His reveal might be the aftermath of Genshin's own version of 100 vs 1. Similar to how they gave a nod to Final Fantasy VII when we were forced to walk through a trail of bodies left before the Raiden boss fight rematch. I'd like to dive into Varka real quick. We know he's the age of a previous generation, as Jean says he's a legend of his own generation, which in my head must mean he's not from her generation, which would make him around the same age as her father, if not older. My guess would be in between mid-30s, early 40s. Who knows, maybe this journey of his was because it's Abyss related, further relating him to Artorias, but that's enough about speculation for now. On to Berserk. I'll go further into speculation on Varka at the end. There's not enough to really go off, but I find it fun to think about, and if they continue to take inspiration from legends, anime, manga, and games, it's not too ridiculous to try and guess based off. Even though the chances of me being right is very high, I'll admit. These two sets are the only two that I found to be close to Berserk in the smallest way. It is a stretch, but being that these sets are some of the darkest in Genshin, I think it's fair to draw similarities. Those being the Bloodstained set, and pretty much a dead giveaway, the Berserker set, which I was always suspecting to be a reference, but really I can only pick 2 descriptions out of that set, so not as many similarities as I expected. But Bloodstained seems more like the Berserker armor, while the Berserker seems to be more like Guts with and without the armor. And to clarify for those who either do not know or forgot, the Berserk armor eliminates the wearer's ability to feel pain. It's deadly and a double-edged sword, as it drains the life of whoever uses it and usually leads to insanity and loss of self. The wearer usually become a victim of their inner rage and loses their humanity in the process. And besides that, Guts specifically when wearing the Berserker armor fights like an animal, and Guts' animal is a demonic wolf or canine in general, wielding a giant sword called the Dragon Slayer, just like Artorias' sword. Its contact with evil, or the Abyss in Artorias' case, cursed, but also gave it properties that allow it to strike beings that wouldn't normally be able to be hurt by a physical weapon. Guts also was going on a journey of revenge, and to save his lover, Casca. This is a big stretch, but Casca Varka. Stupid, I know. My spell check was getting on my nerves. When I tried to type Casca, it would swap it with Varka, but this journey involved others. Also, I compare Mona to Skirk, but Shriek is a stereotypical mage type, besides that it's her relationship with her master, as she serves under a greater astrologer. How she connects with astrology almost like it talks to her just reminded me of Shriek, but it's just something I noticed. Doubt there's any inspiration behind that. If so, definitely not Berserk. But onto the artifact sets. I'll just show the wiki lore and explain why I think it's a nod to Berserk or reference. Bloodstained is kind of a stretch, but this is just headcanon. Maybe someone might agree. The Bloodstained Flower of Iron. All I can say is the relationship between knight and damsel might be like Guts and Casca, only in the fact that they couldn't be together. Except the knight didn't take the damsel while Guts did. Also, Casca isn't a damsel, but all this is me saying two lovers. That's Casca. Night damsel. Bloodstained black plume. Sounds more like a man who can no longer feel and losing their senses, which is a side effect of the Berserk armor. But also this man is on a warpath, but unlike Guts, his aim is just fighting evil and fighting for justice, while Guts is for revenge and healing his lover. So they're opposite in many ways, but even in opposites I see similarities. Lastly, the way he sees himself become a monster is very much like Guts, who in certain moments before the Berserk armor had evil thoughts and would lose control, hurting Casca, but regained control. Bloodstained goblet. I'd say this is like Guts' time fighting demons, never having the privilege of safety, always on his guard. The only difference between Guts and this knight is their reasoning. One is chivalry, honor, and justice, but ultimately corrupted, and Guts is seeking revenge, and both were the last man standing. At least that's what I'm getting from this description. Which in Berserk's case would be the aftermath of the eclipse. Bloodstained iron mask. First off, you're not going to tell me this isn't a Berserk reference. Everything else I'll admit to reaching, but this. This has to be Guts' Berserk armor. This has to have been inspired, or a nod to Berserk. One red eye. The other empty, as if it no longer works. The video game screwed it up, but originally the open eye glowed while the dead eye was dim. But either way, that's Guts. The design alone was enough for me to justify my suspicion. As for the actual lore of the mask, this was what I was talking about, how Guts was corrupted by his rage before the Berserk armor and almost hurt Casca. The knight was very much a berserker, but in control, just frightful to see what he was capable of. Which also happened to Guts. Nearly attacking his allies. Both were afraid of hurting those around them. Bloodstained final hour. Okay, this would be a mix between Guts and Artorias, only because. And I'm admitting that I'm not a lore buff. I was only curious and looked into the lore after getting the Wolf's Gravestone and reading its lore in game. But if this knight's journey is in the abyss, well, I can't see how I can't mention Artorias directly. Okay, upon actual reading the description, this is literally Artorias, except this abyss doesn't seem as evil as Dark Souls. This isn't so much a genshin lore video, rather me just noting possible similarities. To further explain, Artorias was a knight that was tasked with fighting the abyss and also rescued a princess, but to say there was romance, I couldn't say, as Dark Souls doesn't personify Artorias enough beyond his deeds. Artorias fought at an ancient kingdom and was eventually beaten by the father of the abyss, but was also being corrupted by the abyss. This knight seems to pledge allegiance to the abyss for justice of the ancient city Canria. Also, like Artorias, he saw the truth, and it changed him. But like Guts, I could say this equates to the eclipse. An event of carnage and bloodshed. Had it not been for intervention, Guts would have eventually been sacrificed. So that's another similarity, but separation from Berserk. Now for the Berserker set. I'm only going over two, as the others are too generic for me to compare to Berserk. It's a classic revenge tale, that's as far as the similarities go. Berserker battle mask. It just sounds like the armor fused to the man, which is exactly what the Berserker armor does to heal Guts of broken bones and other injuries. Not allowing blood or pain to stop him, just like Guts wearing his armor. Berserker rose. The only thing I can say is both had no family or anyone and speaks of only ever being on the battlefield. Besides tending to a garden, which isn't like anything Guts would do. Another similarity, but separation. The only time Guts felt safe was when he was swinging his sword. Something like that at least, which is almost the complete opposite of a gardener warrior. And just had to throw this in there. Personally, this annoys me. Both eyes are not supposed to glow. His dead eye as depicted in the manga and anime and earlier games did not glow. Only his working eye glows red. This is simple a case of the rule of cool or artistic liberties. I've been reading Berserk since 2011. Okay, so back on to the video, just had to clear that up, it's a big misconception. I'm adding this in after diving deeper into the Knight of Boreas, and more importantly the wolf pup and his relations to others. 3 people of importance and 2 weapons. Ravenwood. Arundel. Rostam. The two weapons being Ferrous Shadow and obviously Blood-Tainted Greatsword. Starting off with Ravenwood, the oldest named Knight of Boreas. Not much to say about him without mentioning Ferrous Shadow. Arundelin's sword modeled after Ravenwood's greatsword. Interesting. Now look at Blood-Tainted Greatsword. Now let's look at Artorias' Greatsword. At first I believed this to be a simple design, it's not that unique of a design. Until I started seeing too many similarities between everything surrounding Artorias and the Knights of Boreas. Let's continue. Blood-Tainted Greatsword. Now Wiki says it's a nod to Viking legend. But I'd like to also mention Berserk. So let's go over the description. Also, it's very much likely this is the same chivalrous knight of the Bloodstained set. So the description of the greatsword, one very important thing of note. Legend says that after slaying the venomous dragon. This is a stretch, but what is Guts' sword called again? The Dragon Slayer. Coincidence, huh? And how he bathed his sword in its blood, and it became venomous, reminds me of how Guts had made his sword capable of harming beings that are supernatural. Okay, so let's continue. Rostam and Arundel. Might be a spin on Guts and Griffith, and THR Crimson Witch being Casca. Minus the betrayal among other things. Reason being was Rostam was Arundelin's right-hand man, and wasn't shy from doing dirty work. Sounds like Guts and Griffith to me. But really that's a stretch. But Rostam the wolf pup mentored the bloodstained knight. Further connecting the dots. That's as far as I can go for that. The rest is speculation about Varka based on character dialogue. And we know Varka is out on a quest and took Jean and Barbara's father with him alongside the elite soldiers. Which I'm not sure if he does this for every expedition, but being how the world is almost in a state of serious danger, I'd guess that this was a serious expedition for the safety of Mondstadt, if not the world. As for his vision, Moyo can do whatever they want, but I'd say a Nemo Claymore. Based on Boreas boss fight, and I'm not saying Cryo because we have Eula, and seeing how visions share personalities with each other. Not always of course, but just out of speculation. My other reason for a Nemo is his carefree attitude. His other trait is described as not being one for trivial matters like gossip and such. Almost sounds honorable, maybe even chivalrous. Who else was chivalrous? Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and guess that Varka's quest was serious and Abyss related, a threat to Mondstadt if not the world, as I do see the Knights of Favnius as a sort of international mediator. Which would make them the ones to respond to such a crisis, which also leave me to believe the only way we will see Varka is three ways. It was Fatui related, we see him sooner than later. Or he wasn't far off and returns with good news. But if it's Abyss related and we see him soon, either he was greatly injured, being the only known survivor, resting up in another region or providing assistance. Or he sends back a member of his expedition for reinforcement, which leads us to him. Both could be region related, so it's a matter of which region, and if I had to guess I'd say they'd introduce a midsection region if they wanted a early release of Varka. As for the member of his expedition he sent for backup, could be a playable 4-star. And to explain what I mean by his skill in my other video. The first step would be a counter, the second would be a teleport strike that strikes the target and leaps up, which would create an Anemo whirlwind. Then the last step would be another teleport forward, but after there's a series of strikes behind him that has a vacuum effect to keep everything in the whirlwind vortex. Like, think of it like this. Your skill has 3 steps. Each has a separate cooldown. The first step is a counter that utilizes the recent counter block event. The second step is the Climacrid strike that has a longer cooldown than the counter. The third step is after the Climacrid, which would be another teleport followed by attack like Kecking or Virgil's finisher, but on a scale fitting a skill. Also, this can be like Yamiko, and it can add a choice to save his teleport strike for something else, rather than only for the second step. So say you skip his final skill. The first step, the counter all reset by then, but not the second step, meaning you counter and follow up with the immediate final. Just adds a layer of choice. I guess that would be busted. Basically his skill is for counter only, but wouldn't have much of a cooldown, maybe like a second. but it's only useful for countering, so how busted could it be besides it DB? I just think it would be fun and cool to counter without too many time restriction, or at least utilize that recent event. Maybe even add a monster that can utilize this mechanism like the Oni in the event. Maybe the counter CD is short, but this new boss fight has an attack that matches perfectly with the CD of the counter, but obviously you could only counter non-stop if step 2 and 3 are on cooldown. I don't know, it's just a thought. To better explain my idea for his burst, think Razor, but for the whole team. Instead of a torso, it would be individual limbs per strike that could match perfectly with Razor attacks. Except each hit has its only multiplier like Raiden's. Only works for normal attacks. Okay, this sounds broken, I admit. It's all for fun. Notable things I found while researching. Varka, while not exactly, is kinda like Farkas, just switch F with V and take out the S. Farkas does relate to wolf or wolf-like. Just something I thought might be interesting. Also, Varka I guess has relations to Barbara in name alone, but I'm not too sure about that one. Well, that's all for this video, hope you enjoyed.